Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and you're listening to the Networking RX podcast. I appreciate those who have subscribed, those who are consistent listeners, and those who have referred other people to us. If you are a consistent listener, you know that from time to time I will have guests on, and today is another guest day. I have another wonderful guest, and I will get into that. But before we do, what I want to do is I want to remind you that we are looking to add quality people to our stable of franchisees. This is a unique franchise opportunity that's geared for aspiring entrepreneurs or professionals to add on to what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week, our franchisees operate the AmSpirit Business Connections program. The rest of the week, they're accountants, attorneys, financial advisors, realtors, coaches, and consultants of various kinds. If you're interested, contact me. There's an email in the show notes, or we'll provide one at the very end of the podcast. Again, today we have a guest, and I want to kind of introduce our guest, Tim Nichols. In 2012, Tim worked for a big name bank, a brokerage firm, and he actually left to open up an independent financial practice, financial services practice. But the interesting thing was he did it in a town where he knew no one. He had zero assets under management, but within 12 months, he had grown that practice to $3 million. That's a 3 with 6 zeros. That's how many assets he had under management. And by the metrics they use in the financial industry, he had grown his practice by 3 million % with no print, no radio, no digital, no social media advertising. It was solely the result of what he refers to as the 3 million % process. In fact, the success of that led him to author a book called 3 million %, 5 Proven Keys to My Success with the Chamber of Commerce. And along with that, or as kind of part of that, or rolling an extension of that, and he'll share more on this, but he created a peer advisory training program that is organically spreading throughout the United States, and these are called business growth groups. And through those, they teach the process, this 3 million % process. They mentor the implementation of it, and they encourage active engagement and help those who will participate establish community and accountability. It's been a great success for him. In fact, April of last year, April of 2019, he found that his demand for this relationship marketing strategy had progressed to the point that it was really a standalone business, and it required his full-time attention, more or less. And so after 17 years in the financial advisory world, he sold his financial practice and continues to create, write, train, and mentor and transform business owners into dynamic influencers. With that, welcome, Tim.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. There's quite a story there, and I do appreciate the little bit that you've given me. I know there's more to it. How did you end up in this small town not knowing anybody? I guess there's a whole lot to that. If you want to get into that, would be great.
Yes, I'll just give you a general overview. I actually spent 17 years as a financial advisor, and I did that starting off with the major banks and broker dealers, and I was with them for about 10 years, and I came to a place where I wanted to go independent, but I wanted to move out of big city Dallas into one of the suburbs, and just to be closer to my kids, I needed to get to this one community. So I went, and this is actually an affluent community. They don't necessarily like people moving in, but I had learned to circumvent that by loving those citizens more than a lot of times the current people that live there did. But it was all in the implementation of this process that I learned how to basically growth hack influence. And I did that by mentoring businesses that were outside of the circle of influence. And so I didn't know I had a process to do that until I did it. I was about 3 years in, and I had grown so well using the Chamber of Commerce as a platform that I had. I was on the chamber board of directors at the time, and noticed in their numbers that we had an emotional leak. What that looked like, where we were losing about 5 to 10 businesses per month that were just leaving the chamber, and their responses in their exit interviews were, "We never got anything out of the chamber, or it never did anything for us." And I went to the CEO and said, "I know how to fix this." And she said, "Well, if you can do that, you'll be in the Chamber of Commerce Hall of Fame." Well, I actually said, "Well, all I have to do is implement the process that I've been using all along, and teach them how to do that." And so through that, she encouraged me to do a talk for our chamber that would teach them what to do. So this whole thing actually started off as a lunch and learn for our chamber in 2016. So this was where the book and all that stuff became to come about. Otherwise, I was just growing my business like I always did, and teaching other businesses how to do what I was doing. Well, after that lunch and learn, she said, "Well, I have an opportunity for you to speak to the Texas Chamber of Commerce Executives Conference. We would love to have you do a breakout session on this." So keep in mind, I just had my index cards for the notes.
Okay.
I didn't even have a book out or anything. And what the interesting part is that conference was in 7 weeks. And so from the time I spoke. So I actually wrote this book in 6 days and self-published, and had it in my hands in 7 weeks, the day before I left for a 3-day conference to speak about the book.
Wow.
So I had the speaking engagement lined up before I even wrote the book about the book. And so I took and spoke to those Texas Chamber of Commerce executives. It went fantastically well. And at the time, I had no hopes or dreams of building out this program. I was just thinking book sales, and I continue to grow my business like I always have been. And it just progressed and progressed. And I began to think, well, I'm mentoring 20 businesses at a time anyway, and I can't take on any more businesses to mentor. So let me start teaching my mentees how to mentor other businesses to do this.
Gotcha.
And so that developed into the Growth Group program.
I gotcha. It's interesting. There are probably people listening right now who are saying, I've tried to do that and couldn't do it. And you did it and really weren't trying to do it. And maybe there's a life lesson in there. I point to Facebook from time to time. When they put Facebook together, they were just trying to meet girls. They weren't trying to be a billion-dollar enterprise.
Right.
And there are people out there who've tried to duplicate Facebook and haven't been able to make it happen. And I guess the bottom line is you can't intend something to happen organically. It's organic is organic. And it's just the way it is. Anyhow, in reference to your book, 3 million%, 5 proven keys to my success. And I don't want to give the book away. I want people to buy the book. But the 5 things that you talk about are, and I want to touch on a few things in here. One is deepening relationships. The second is elevating your profile. Third is leveraging networks. 4 is building immediate credibility. And then 5 is establishing community by gaining from the experience, resources, and encouragement of others. There were a couple things in the book that really kind of jumped out at me. You talked on thought leadership. I wanted you to kind of expand on your ideas on thought leadership, some of the things you've done, some of the things you encourage other people to do. Because I really think that's a powerful way that people can add value to the world that's often overlooked.
Well, first of all, I would say don't worry about stepping on the book too much, because I could actually do a 2-day workshop on the tactics of how to do this, and that's how
Okay.
deep it would go. So I've actually done a Masters of Influence online course about this, and in there I share the depth and tactics of it. But to answer your question, I have a talk just on growth hacking influence, and that touches on the thought leadership. The thought leadership part of it is really elevating your profile within the community. And we talk about thought leadership in there, but also engagement versus participation, becoming visible and memorable. And that's the key part of it. As far as how to do that, how to gain that thought leadership, you really have to incorporate all of it into that. I wanted to be the person that they came to for everything, right? I wanted to be their Google, right? So
Okay.
I was actually doing this before there was Google, but I wanted to be the local version of Google, where if something was happening in town, they came to me for the answers for that. But to do that, you have to be engaged. You can't just participate in events. I started putting myself in position where I was on the committees to lead these events, and then worked myself up to chair of these events, of these committees that were handling a lot of the events in town and stuff like that. But what I would do is really incorporate all 5 keys in this, and all of it works together. So the mentorship, the deepening relationships, all of that has to work together. But as far as becoming visible and memorable, as I increased my engagement, as I volunteered more within the community, within the Chamber of Commerce, within these other networking groups, that elevated my profile. So I actually became visible as someone to go to who might know the answers, or who might know someone who would know the answers.
So a lot of this $3 million that you amassed came from people who weren't, pardon the expression, part of the old boy network. They were kind of outsiders, similarly situated to you. Is that a fair statement in this small town? Or
Actually, that it would my influence came from the outsiders.
Okay.
But I actually started managing assets of the centers of influence as well.
Okay.
Right. And
Yeah.
so and really I have tactical drawings on how to do this and all that kind of stuff that I'll lay out in the online course. But as far as, I'll break it down to, since you have a networking program, let me equate this to a happy hour. Okay.
Okay.
If you had a happy hour at a bar, right? Let's say the bar's in the middle, but most of the people who frequent that happy hour are there in the center as the center of influence, right?
Oh, yep.
That about right? So what I noticed, as me being an outsider who knew no one in this town, right? Let's say I didn't know anybody at this happy hour that we're using as an example. I didn't worry myself with trying to become one of those in the center of influence. I met them, but I didn't worry about becoming one of them. What I did do was I began to meet the people who were introverted, who were new, who maybe were new to business, they could be new to town, and I started connecting them with others like them. Right?
Okay. Yep.
So I incorporated this whole process in this one scenario. So I would, in that room, every networking event we had, every happy hour we had, or so, let's say, I would go deep. I would try to deepen relationships with 20% of the room. I wouldn't try to pass out business cards. I found that to be useless. Nobody cared who I was,
Right.
and nobody cared who Nichols Wealth Management was. Right? that wasn't even the goal. The goal was to go deep and develop referral generators out of each individual. But how I did that, when I would deepen relationships with them, I actually set goals as to why I was there and how many one-on-one appointments I would get out of that meeting. But then in that, I would try to find someone or something in common. And the someone was more important than the something, because then once I had someone in common, it would add to my credibility if they were a good someone to know in common.
Right.
And it would give me an immediate credibility there. And then it would encourage them to see me and remember me. I was visible and memorable to them then, because then they would remember, oh, so and so from whatever it was, right? And then I began to, once I got a deeper relationship with them, I would take and introduce them to the next person that I was going to meet as well. And I began to form this kind of a chain of relationships as I went, and drag them into the next conversation.
Gotcha.
And introduce them around as well. And that gave me permission, if I needed to go deeper with someone, I could leave that person talking to another and then re-engage the person I just went deep with back into that group. And so what happens if you go several times to this type of event, you imagine all of the introverts and new people around the outside of that center of influence. And if you've mentored them into how to build their business, how to make connections, things like that, you eventually become their center of influence.
Okay. Now you talk about these one-on-ones. What was the premise that you had for setting up one-on-ones? Because you didn't talk about Nichols Wealth Management. It sounds like hey, let's get together, let's have a cup of coffee to just get acquainted, or how did that look?
How I structured that was to set that up as a 15 to 30 minute appointment to learn how to help one another grow. The one thing that we had in common is that we wanted to grow our businesses. It didn't matter if they were an entrepreneur or an employee. They needed to grow. If they were there, they needed to grow.
Right.
But I would kind of make that come up in the conversation. So we had that established. So then, instead of setting myself up for a sales pitch from them in this one-on-one, I didn't want an hour of hearing about their product.
Right.
And I helped them know that we weren't there to buy. We were there to learn about each other and help each other grow. So that took the pressure off of them, that they weren't going to have an hour of me talking about their IRA either.
Right.
Right. And so that just allowed for that conversation to take a different approach. We kind of set the parameters for that conversation before it happened. And then once I learned more about them in that one-on-one, I actually knew better how to plug them into the committees where I was already engaged, instead of just participating and going to events or trying to do things like sponsoring events. Nobody cared about my brand name.
Mm-hmm.
I needed relationships, and I knew that they probably needed relationships too. And I could find where they needed relationships, and I could leverage networks. So I could take people from, let's say, that happy hour, and I could plug them into another committee. I could plug them into the luncheon. I could plug them into different things that we were doing within the chamber, or even outside of the chamber. If I was in other nonprofits or service organizations or anything like that, I would start inviting them into those different groups. My premise of the one-on-one was to learn what they needed and who they needed to know, so that I knew better how to leverage their networks and build that credibility. The more I could establish myself as a mentor to them, the more I gained thought leadership and the more I gained credibility.
I mean, you were all in, just adding value, it sounds like.
Right.
I mean, I think that's great. You also reference in the book transformers and connectors. Can you explain those two terms? I get connectors. Most people get connectors. Transformers, other than the movie Transformers.
Well, and let me back up and tie in the last point we made.
Sure.
I took a Zig Ziglar quote and made a business model out of it, and I carried that forward. So you can have everything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want in life.
Yep.
And that's what I did. Now, one thing I learned from uh, actually at first I had seen everybody as just connectors making one-off connections, right? So you would just connect one person to another. So the one-on-ones, I would actually learn what they needed and
Right.
go make an individual connection there. That's what most people see. Now, I don't like how social media has, I'm going to say, changed the definition of what I think an influencer should be. But as far as transformers, that's why I came up with that word to use here, because you're like a power station
Okay.
that is constantly surging encouragement, camaraderie, education, information, and what you're doing is if you start connecting connectors, right? It's like a power grid would be. If
Yep.
you can connect one connector to another connector, that deepens my relationships, that elevates my profile, that leverages networks, it builds my credibility and establishes community, right?
Yep.
And so every time I would connect one connector to another, they could actually make their one-off connections with each other's networks, if you will.
Right.
So as a transformer, I was a connector of connectors. Now, my version of what an influencer is a stepped up version of a transformer now, where I am the power grid, right? So I am connecting transformers now. So I find transformers in communities and I connect them to one another
Right.
and then let them leverage their resources with one another.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about your online course. Let's talk about the business growth groups. Would like you to share a little bit of. Those are two separate things, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The business growth groups, are those in person? Do you use technology, Zoom, webinars, Google Hangouts to do those? How do those work?
They actually started off in person. I actually started off with a 10-person concept, 10 businesses in a group. And some of the really massive churches have taken this concept of making the large small by doing these community groups, life groups, they call them different things.
Right.
But you say you got this 16,000 member church and they put you in groups of 20 or so. Well, I wanted to do that in the business community, but what I noticed was you needed a tighter knit community. But what I noticed is no one would tell you the truth.
Interesting.
And so everybody wanted to say what they thought would make you feel good at networking events or anything like that within the business community. But I wanted to know if I was being blindsided. As a financial advisor, if I've got someone speaking negatively about me, or if I've made a mistake at a networking event, if I've said something I shouldn't have, if I could do something better, if something's off with my appearance, if there is something I could do better to get more return on investment with my chamber membership.
Right.
I need to know that stuff, right? And what I noticed is nobody was really paying attention to any of that, right? So I just started off with a group of 10, but there's all kinds of referral groups out there and networking groups. So as a financial advisor, my typical referral sources were a CPA, maybe an estate planning attorney, bookkeepers, anybody who had come across financial conversations, right? Insurance agents possibly. But then again, in banks, they would even become competition. So
Right.
what I wanted to do was create an opportunity not only to speak truth into one another, but also hear from different and build relationships with different industries that had nothing to do with me. So floor cleaners, IT companies, um, foundation repair companies, senior care facilities, retail stores, gyms, nutritionists. These were people that had nothing to do with me and would not be entering into any financial conversations with anyone. But what I did learn was everyone had life happening to them, right? Where maybe grandparents died or, just things happened going through divorces and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
I wanted to develop atypical referral generation sources. right? And so I started putting these groups together and making them industry diverse within each growth group. So then they began to grow organically. So we've now had hundreds go through the program. It's spread into multiple communities and now spreading nationwide. But what happens is it grows typically organically, where they actually go out and build these groups themselves. We're having to convert to doing it virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for virtual online businesses. They need help too, and they don't do anything in their local communities a lot of times, right? So we're trying to make that virtual part, but most of the time it works ideally in the local community. So even like many of the suburbs of Dallas have groups in them now, and what happens is they organically go out and recruit their own groups.
Right.
Because what they need to do to build immediate credibility is to go mentor other businesses. And the faster they can go mentor you don't just go to a business and say, hey, can I mentor you? You say, hey, would you want to join my growth group?
Right.
We're going to help you grow, right? We want to help you grow. And it all goes back to that Ziegler quote that I mentioned. You can have everything you want in life if you open up other people get what they want in life.
Absolutely.
So the real race is try to help as many people as fast as you possibly can.
Right.
So that you can grow your referral generation business.
Gotcha. The online course, and before we're done, I certainly want to get a link from you, a way of getting in touch with you. So if somebody's interested in either or both, they can. I guess share a little about the online course. Is it something that's evergreen, so somebody can jump in at any point, or is there a schedule?
Well, it is. It is always available, and so it is not something to teach live. It's recorded and evergreen.
Okay.
So what I did was I needed another book. Really. I needed a second version of the book to teach what I've even learned since I've written the first book, but also kind of transcribe and translate some of the stories that have happened,
right,
things like that. But what I learned was that the timing aspect, or the time that people had to put in, and although the book itself is like, I want to say 67 pages and doesn't take very long to read. It didn't take very long to read, but I've got stories in there that help people understand, but it's very basic. The Masters of Influence online course is a very in-depth tactical approach as to how to do this. It lays out for you everything that you would need to do in your own community to implement this whole process, right?
Okay.
What the growth groups do, though, is they actually help keep you accountable and provide experiences that they're each having, and they speak back into one another. So I implemented a mastermind concept where they do speak hard truth into one another and offer ideas and ask questions. But with the online course, it just breaks down the mindset. It goes into detail on how do you develop relationships quickly? How do you elevate your profile in the community? How do you leverage networks, build credibility, or establish community? And so it really, by the time of it, it says it takes an hour, but it's so in depth that it would take much longer to get through that. Also, instead of writing another book where you just read it, a lot of my followers, I would say, listen to books through Audible and just audiobooks in general.
Right.
And so what this does is has an audio version where they can listen to it. So I've got busy moms that are also restaurant owners that are trying to grow their business, and they drive all over town making their deliveries and delivering kids, and they get through the book within an hour.
Gotcha.
The online course, anyway.
Somebody's interested, how do they get a hold of you, get a hold of the course? Is there kind of one portal we would send them into?
The portal they would go to would be the https://access.3millionpercent.com. Now,
access 3 million, the number 3 million written out?
Access dot the number 3, and then spell out 1,000,000%, all run together, .com.
That's the
So
best way to kind of get into this.
there,
Okay, good.
there you see the membership layout, and you'll see the online course as a product there. Uh, I think you can access it without being a member, but I'll double check on that. Another thing to consider is that we'd set up this growth group program, and several of the businesses had been through that several times, and they felt like they were becoming more of the teacher
Mm-hmm.
and getting less feedback about their own businesses. And so I created an inner circle program. So we have inner circle bronze, silver inner circle, gold inner circle, and platinum.
Gotcha.
And so these are different tier levels of experienced businesses that speak into one another.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I will get this into the show notes. I will test it out. I would imagine there's a place for them to contact you as well through that website. So if they,
There is. My email address is timnichols@3millionpercent.com. And that's
Okay.
number 3 and spell out millionpercent.com.
Okay.
I can
Thank you.
email that to you, also.
That's fine. Yeah, I'll get it. You do that and give me that. I'll get it in the show notes. But I appreciate you being on today. This has been very informative. Quite a story, quite a success, and it sounds like it's something that most anybody can take a shot at duplicating.
We have anything from first-time entrepreneurs to bank vice presidents in the program.
Sounds great. Sounds great. All right. Well, you have a great day.
Thank you, Frank. You too.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.